Yeah, well, we're doing. Yeah. Go ahead, Nikki.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Knowledge Share and Community Partners meeting. Our topics for today's Knowledge Share are climate development permits in District of West Vancouver and District of North Vancouver. This presentation is a part of series brought forward to the Coastal Climate Resilience Collaborative to support knowledge share and ideation for regional climate resilience. The project is funded by Natural Resources Canada's Climate Resilient Coastal Communities Program, and we're so glad that you could join us today. And today I'm joining from Toronto, or Toronto, the place in the water where trees are standing. It is the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat. Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to the presentations today. Next slide, please. So our first presentation is from the District of West Vancouver on the topic of climate development permits. We're joined today by Christopher Monaghan, Climate Action Coordinator with the District of West Vancouver. Chris also represents the district in our collaborative and brings an important municipal perspective to these discussions. We also have Heather Keith, Senior Manager of Climate Action and Environment with the district, joining us on the call today. Heather will also be available to answer your questions in the Q&A. I will pass it on to Chris to share his screen and start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and share here. Are you seeing the presenter mode?
We see your notes slide.
Okay.
Not the full. It's not the full screen.
Maybe I can share this one.
Usually, you have a swap option at the top. Yeah,
that's good now.
It's good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I'm very happy to present on the District of West Vancouver's Foreshore and Wildfire Hazard Development Permit areas. I'll be presenting, then also the Senior Manager, Heather Keith, will come in near the end to talk about lessons learned as well and share her insight there. So yeah, just to start it off right away, I will be, sorry, just, there we go. Just giving a bit of an outline for today's presentation. First, I'll talk about just a general overview of the climate-related DPAs for the District of West Vancouver. Then I'll jump into two of our DPAs that I wanted to share today, which is the Foreshore DPA and the Wildfire Hazard DPA. And then lastly, like I mentioned, we'll be discussing lessons learned. So there we go. So jump right in. So this is, like I mentioned, just a general overview of our climate-related DPAs. The ball really got rolling for this kind of work back in 2019 when Council declared a climate emergency. So from there, staff identified a number of key climate impacts affecting the community, including sea level rise, flooding, wildfires. These are all major impacts that have already been impacting the community well before the climate emergency, but has only been worsening over time. So it just really was at the forefront of council and the community's mind. So it's time that concrete action is taken on these impacts, so they don't get worse and the community just is unable to be resilient to them. So acknowledging the need to adapt, one approach that was considered really focused on new building regulations, specifically the designation of development permit areas in the district. So what is that exactly? What are development permit areas and what are their uses? Well, it is a policy to allow local governments to identify locations that need special treatment for certain purposes. This is specifically in Section 4881AB of the Local Government Act. And really, in this context, it is to provide protection of development from hazards and protection of the natural environment. Critically, these DPAs provide a consistent framework for permitting of development activities and builds community resilience and acts as a strong mechanism for change. So now I'll just go into each DPA specifically, starting with the Foreshore DPA. So to give a bit more background, like this DPA was adopted in April 2022, so fairly recently, but there was a lot of work happening before this was actually adopted. But first, the objective of this DPA is to minimize risks to people and property from coastal hazards while preserving and enhancing the integrity of the foreshore environment. So the extent of the DPA was derived from a flood mapping analysis of the coastline. So the process included dividing the coastline into segments based on topography and bathymetry. And then for each, there was the calculation of the flood construction level of each segment. So any properties at an elevation below the flood construction level, also the FCL known as, was included in this DPA. So what does the flood construction level consist of? Well, if you see the image in the bottom of the screen, it consists of 5 elements. So you're looking at the water level, sea level rise up to 1 meter, uh, land uplift, tides, wave effects. Like these all come into play to really dictate what levels structures should be built to. And I guess just quickly a little bit more on the background of the flood mapping analysis, because it's a critical part of all this. This analysis was driven by the province releasing their updated guidelines for flood mapping back in 2018. So with waterfront properties undergoing development in West Vancouver, staff implemented Section 56 of the Community Charter to ensure houses were developed safely for their intended use based on this new updated guideline. So in that case, the District of West Vancouver required properties to build to the FCL before the DPA was done through the Community Charter, as mentioned, and then it was formalized with a DPA in 2022. So just to reiterate, the FCL looks at the lowest elevation for a dwelling to avoid coastal flooding and sea level rise. Okay, so now I'll actually get to show you the map. So the extent of the boundary of this DPA, and as you can see, it covers the vast majority of all shoreline properties in the district. So yeah, it really includes all properties, and I know it might be a little hard to see, so just if you want to look at the pop out, that gives a clear idea. Just quickly, the orange is the foreshore DPA, and then the blue line that you see, a squiggly line, is the flood construction level. So yeah, the blue line was created first and then the orange line after. And what that means is all properties with at least some portion below the FCL line was to be included in the DPA. So to reiterate, the flood construction level was calculated along the coast for areas with similar topography and bathymetry, and the provincial guidelines, which includes planning for 1 meter sea level rise by the year 2100. So actually, in most cases, the DPA includes the properties adjacent to the foreshore, as you see. But in some cases, there are low-lying areas, so the DPA goes further inland due to the lower elevation there and the risk for like storm surge and sea level rise encroaching on those areas. So yeah, critically, there are like some two types of controls that come with this DPA. So what it's able to actually enforce. And that, first of all, is the subdivisions or buildings. So it controls on new building elevation and location to reduce flood hazard risks. So that really addresses the adaptation tool for sea level rise, as already mentioned. So that's fairly straightforward. The second control is land alteration, and this is really controlling the protection of the natural environment of the foreshore. So what that does is addresses the need to protect the sensitive environment of the foreshore from impacts of redevelopment. And now the intention of the DPA is not to require removal of existing structures, as that would be like quite difficult in the context of private property owners, but to address impacts of new structures to the environment and protect against flood hazards of potentially existing buildings as well. So I'll just dive into a little bit more on the land alteration piece. That's there. So yeah, with the land alteration, you're really looking at the area within 15 meters of the natural boundary of the ocean, also known as the riparian zone. And specifically within that, there are multiple sort of requirements that need to be met for any sort of alteration. And that's the list that you could see here on the screen. So for example, it requires the removal of hard surfaces where possible, environmental assessments that consider retention of key habitat, slope stability, changes to runoff, wave and storm impacts to new structures. It also requires natural landscaping to minimize impacts on the foreshore, and seawalls and hard armoring only where the engineer has determined that soft approaches are not appropriate. So really trying to encourage that nature-based solution aspect to all sort of protections of the foreshore. So that's just a bit more about that. I will now move on to the wildfire hazard DPA. So this is the second climate-related DPA that was brought forward and adopted by Council in December 2020. And the objective is to minimize the potential for the spread of wildfire and the resulting risk to people, property, and district forests and parks. So it actually applies to properties within 100 meters of a contiguous forested area undergoing new development or subdivision. And it requires a wildfire hazard assessment report by a qualified professional that includes recommendations to reduce wildfire risks. Now, these assessments are reviewed against the District of West Vancouver development permit guidelines that incorporate fire smart principles. And these are really, these principles are the basis for our guidelines. So I can go into a little bit more detail there. But just to give you an example of FireSmart, the image in the bottom corner really shows 3 different stages of protection that's needed. So you have the immediate zone, which is your home, and then you have the intermediate zone, which is the sort of the area nearby, and then the extended zone, which is more out, past your home, 10 meters to 30 meters away. So I'll go into a little bit more details for each. But first, I just wanted to give you another map. And this just shows the extent of the DPA, which is fairly extensive given West Vancouver has some of the highest canopy coverages in Metro Vancouver. So a lot of forested areas here. And it includes 5,000 homes in the district. So just to show the extent there, it's quite a lot. But I'll just go into sort of what guidelines are there for developments that are happening in the area. So what do people have to look out for and required of them to proceed? So the first one is looking at building location and material. So this is really talking about the immediate and physical place you're trying to protect. And this includes, I'm not going to list them all, but they're all there, includes things as locating the building as far as away from the forest interface as possible, using fire-resistant materials, um, screen and doing a lot of other sort of on-site location sort of resilience measures that you can come up with. The next one is talking about subdivision layout. So which ideally looks to make resilient the near vicinity of buildings. So you're looking to a design that includes fire breaks, also locate the buildings far away, but that includes landscaping as well, like not just your immediate physical structure that you're trying to protect, using setback distances from different environmental aspects. Um, so yeah, this is more just the immediate vicinity. So as you can see in the image below, this helps to clarify it a little bit. You have your home, which is really a building location and the materials used, making that fire resistant as possible. Then you have sort of the nearby area, like your picket fence and your just like hedges nearby, looking to really reduce any sort of fire spread options there. And then you have the third aspect, which is all about landscaping. So the goal here being to create a defensible space of 10 meters around buildings. So which this is also to reduce the amount of combustible fuel and slowing the fire spreads to those critical buildings and infrastructure that you're trying to protect. So it's just creating that buffer zone. Um, and things here include planting fire-resistant native species, using non-combustible materials, start maintaining the nearby trees that you want to keep because there's a lot of benefits to having trees, but making sure that they're resilient to any possible fire encroaching onto them. So removing tree limbs or shrubs that are overhanging roofs or anything that can catch fire and then jump to the next tree or next even building. So yeah, maintain your hedges, thin understory and pruning the trees. These are all just really key aspects that need to be done in the landscaping aspects. So really, this wildfire DPA, hazard DPA, has sort of those three aspects that's needed, right? Building materials, the near vicinity subdivision of your home, and then the landscaping, which is even further out. So that concludes the two DPAs that I wanted to cover, the Foreshore DPA and the Wildfire Hazard DPA. And now I'll just pass it off to Heather if she wanted to discuss any lessons learned from these two adopted DPAs and sort of the implementation since they've been rolled out.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm not going to spend too long because I know we are running out of time, but this is more just for information if anybody was considering implementing DPAs. It was not easy to get these DPAs through. There was a lot of pushback, particularly with the Foreshore one, and a lot of this had to do with the lack of understanding or acceptance that sea level rise was actually an issue. I will say there's a point in here that says advice, use extreme weather events as opportunities to bring new policy to council. That sounds sort of, I will say it's sad at the same time as actually very helpful. Our Foreshore DPA got turned down the first time we went to council. And then I went about a couple weeks after we had a major storm with king tide events that damaged a significant number of waterfront homes. And it passed. There was a lot more acceptance from residents after that happened than before. I will say public engagement is is really needed as for any climate related DPAs, walking residents through how this would apply to their properties. And the DPA is actually quite a good policy instead of putting things right into the building bylaw or whatever, is that there's a lot of flexibility in the guidelines so that you can tailor the guidelines and regulations specifically to each property as they are variable. And so it allows kind of a not one size fits approach, but rather rely on qualified professionals to make the best recommendations for a specific property. We also worked extensively within the organization across lots of different staff to make sure it was what we were developing would actually work on the ground, and getting feedback of staff, operational staff. So that was also really important. I will just note that our wildfire DPA is currently 5,000 properties. We did go to council in March of just this year. Following the fires down in California, our fire chief, and the lessons we've learned that embers can now travel up to 2 kilometers. Our fire chief really wanted the DPA extended to the entire community. We went to council with that recommendation, and it was turned down for the reasons that our tree advocates thought that it would just be detrimental to our urban forest, and our architects thought that we would lose the West Coast feel of house design. So it got turned down for those reasons. We would still advocate and like to return to that, but I would say some of these issues are still continuously have conflict, and it takes a lot of time to move any of these policies through. So I would advocate to just keep speaking to your community and your council as much as possible as you move through. That's all. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Chris and Heather. I do see a few questions in the chat. We will do questions after the next presentation, so we can have more questions and then do the discussions together with District of North Vancouver. If people have any more questions, you can keep putting them in the chat so we don't lose them. And yeah, thanks Heather, thanks Chris for an important conversation. And yeah, we will continue with the Q&A after the next presentation.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Adam Wright, Sustainability Planner from District of North Vancouver, who's also representing the district in our collaborative. Adam brings expertise in sustainable planning and creating low carbon resilient communities. We're also joined today by Carolyn Jackson, Director of Climate Action, Natural Systems and Biodiversity at the district. And she's also joining us today for the discussion. I will pass it on to Adam. Thanks, Adam.
No problem, and thank
I do see your
you.
screen, so I think that's good.
Perfect. Yes, thank you for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to present. Adam Wright, Sustainability Planner from the district. I've been with the district for coming up on 9 years at this point, and happy to share an overview of the district's development permit areas. So just for a brief outline, I'll provide some context, just how the DPAs fit within the district's approach to climate resilience. I'll provide an overview of the DPAs, just summarizing some of the objectives and general requirements of the different DPAs. I'll also outline an associated policy that includes resilience components. So that's the climate-ready rezoning policy for large buildings in the district. And then I'll finally share some insights from implementation. And this is essentially informed by recent conversations with our environment team, as those are the folks that implement the DPAs. I can also follow up with the environment team if needed to answer any detailed questions. So just to zoom out, the district and the North Shore broadly have unique geographic characteristics in the region. There's mountains, waterways, wetlands, ocean, forest slopes, sensitive ecosystems, and species. Many people choose to live in the district because of this natural environment. This unique geography can also present challenges with hazards, including a significant landslide event that we had in 2005, a significant creek flood event in 2014. There was a wildfire in Deep Cove in 2020, a heat dome in 2021 that we're all aware of, and most recently an atmospheric river event in 2024, just last year in the district, which involved historic 1 in 200 year rainfall levels, caused significant flooding, debris flow, power outages, and property damage. So this is all just to say that the urgency of preparing for and responding to the impacts of climate change have never been more clear, and the district continues to advance work in this area. So this is the overarching framework for climate action and environment at the district. We've identified 6 key pathways to reduce emissions, improve resilience, and protect and enhance ecosystem health and biodiversity. The work today touches on 3 of these pathways: climate adaptation, healthy ecosystems, and low carbon resilient buildings. The district has several initiatives to improve resilience, some of which are below. So we have our climate change adaptation strategy, the North Shore sea level rise management strategy, several programs for geohazard and stormwater management, wildfire protection, and forest resilience, as well as the North Shore emergency management resilience and community preparedness initiatives, including the extreme heat response strategy and others. We also have 2 climate-ready building policies, one for our corporate facilities and one for private buildings in the community. And I'll touch on one of those later on in this presentation. And finally, our development permit areas that were designated in the OCP in 2012, and those guide development in hazardous or sensitive areas. So zooming in on our DPAs in the district, there's 3 general categories. The first being hazard mitigation. So that's our creek hazard DPA, our wildfire hazard DPA, and our slope hazard area. The environmental protection category includes the streamside protection DPA and protection of the natural environment DPA. Both of these 2 DPAs have similar geographic areas. They generally apply to forested areas in the district of ecological value, for example, including wetlands or wildlife corridors. They have sensitive riparian areas or other ecosystems. And then finally, the urban planning DPAs, which are one for form and character of buildings, and then the final one for energy conservation, water conservation, and greenhouse gas reduction DPA. And I just note the urban planning DPAs apply to parcels in the district that are not single-family zones. And they're included here just to note that they have some overlap with resilience. So for example, the energy DPA includes measures to address extreme heat in buildings and to reduce urban heat island effect. So for example, including or encouraging exterior shading, overhangs on south-facing windows, reflective roofing materials, and tree planting to maximize shade. The DPAs were informed through risk assessments and mapping for flooding, landslide, debris flow, wildfire interface zones, and sensitive areas, ecological areas. And also just to note that the district's developing a coastal flood hazard DPA, similar to the one that West Vancouver has. And that's largely informed by the North Shore sea level rise strategy and some recent wave modeling work that's been completed. So each of the 7 DPAs has specific definitions, objectives, guidelines, requirements, and exemptions that are all outlined in the OCP. So I'll just provide some general objectives, which are to reduce hazard for people, property, and buildings, and to protect the natural areas. The district typically requires a topographical survey and a site plan for their proposed development, as well as a report from a qualified professional. So this would be the hazard assessment, and it would also typically include mitigation measures. For the environmental protection DPA, so the streamside and natural environment areas, a habitat compensation plan is typically required. And this would include measures to be taken to achieve no net loss in habitat. So this might include restoration measures, tree planting or other planting, invasives removal, or reducing existing encroachment from into protected areas. So the DPAs generally establish a development buffer to mitigate hazard risk from flooding and landslide and wildfire, or to protect sensitive riparian areas and ecosystems. A DP is required for proposed development on a parcel that is located within the DPA. For example, within 15 meters from the top of bank of a waterway in the streamside protection area, within 20 meters of a steep slope, which is defined in the OCP, or if located within the other DPAs, for example, within 125 meters of wildfire risk area, which is equivalent to the contiguous forest in the district. These are just two screenshots of our public GIS tool, GeoWeb, where property owners and permit applicants can see the different DPA layers affecting different properties. So these are the creek hazard and slope hazard DPAs. There's also maps of all 7 DPAs on the DNV website. This is just an overview of the DP review process. So from kind of that initial point of inquiry where a homeowner or applicant is keen to develop or alter land within the DPA, there's an early consultation with environment staff where our team would review requirements and guidelines with the applicant, help them to prepare an application. So the applicant would submit documents, including a site plan, survey, QP reports, and provide a security deposit, which is typically equivalent to 125% of the value of the mitigation measures. There would be a staff review, so our environment team would review compliance against the DP guidelines that are outlined in the OCP, the official community plan. And staff would attach the qualified professional report to the DP and add conditions identified in the report to the DP. So these hazard mitigation measures to be undertaken, things like erosion and sediment control, habitat compensation measures, and so on. Finally, the DP would be issued and registered on title, and that would allow the applicant to apply for a building permit. And following that, there would just be implementation and inspection. So once the construction is actually complete, the qualified professional would sign off. That would indicate that the mitigation measures have been implemented, and the DNV staff would carry out an inspection, site visit, and inspection, and finally release the security deposit. These are just some of the key components of a typical qualified professional report. So a site hazard assessment, looking at topography, vegetation, geology, and so on, slope stability, erosion, creek flooding and debris flows, and sensitive species. Impacts to the proposed development would be outlined, things like drainage, erosion, encroachment into protected areas. Mitigation measures will be listed, so items to stabilize the slope or control drainage, retain ecological features, and manage fuel on site, and then adjusting siting for the proposed building. There's also construction monitoring and maintenance items. So the qualified professional would ideally be overseeing these aspects and kind of contributing to the long-term monitoring maintenance of hazard mitigation measures, for example, for drainage or slope movement. And then finally, certifications and assurances, so a statement that the land can be safely used for its intended purposes with mitigation measures implemented, and all this must meet the DNV's risk tolerance criteria. For example, for the slope hazard DPAs, which is all on our website and in the OCP. And this is all prepared, signed, and sealed by a qualified professional with appropriate qualifications. Just to give a snapshot of the typical professionals that would be involved in the QP reports. So for our slope hazard DPA, geotech engineer or geoscientist, wildfire, typically be a registered forest professional, creek hazard DPA, geotech or hydrological engineer, and then qualified environmental professionals for our streamside protection and natural environment protection DPAs. This is a snapshot of the breakdown of the DPAs that have been administered since they were adopted in 2012. So majority are for slope and wildfire hazard and stream side protection DPAs. Many applicants are exempt from the protection of the natural environment DPA, as they're not often proposing to encroach into vegetated areas or remove vegetation. And that natural environment DPA doesn't have requirements such as that 15-meter buffer that would be present in the stream side protection DPA. Switching gears a little bit to touch on an associated resilience policy that we have for large buildings. It's the climate ready rezoning policy. So this is approved in August 2022. How is it different from the DPAs? So the hazard and environmental protection DPAs broadly apply to new commercial, light industrial, mixed use and residential buildings. And a DP is required whether or not the applicant is seeking a rezoning. Whereas this policy, the climate ready rezoning policy, only applies to new, larger buildings, defined as Part 3 in the building code, that are seeking rezoning. So typically buildings over 600 square meters or over 3 stories that are seeking rezoning. The policy addresses extreme heat and indoor air quality that can be impacted by wildfire smoke and traffic-related air pollution. So those are the 2 resilience measures we're hoping to address through this policy. And it establishes standards for new large buildings in the community, including both mechanical cooling and passive cooling measures for new multifamily residential units to maintain that thermal safety. And then also high performance air filtration systems to maintain indoor air quality. Applicants are also asked to account for and report the embodied emissions associated with the proposed construction materials and implement strategies to reduce these emissions. And finally, just some insights from implementation, just from some conversations with our environment team. So we've been implementing the DPAs for approximately 13 years. So 13 years of identifying hazards and protecting sensitive ecosystems and improving resilience by requiring those qualified professional assessments and implementing those mitigation measures. There's been around 600 plus sites that have had a DP issued since 2012. There's been an increasing number of qualified professionals on the North Shore. So seeing that industry capacity really increase over the years. The DPAs provide regulatory clarity for applicants and homeowners, and there's generally good levels of compliance from applicants. There are some enforcement limitations that were mentioned. So for example, staff can withhold occupancy or security deposit for non-compliance with the DPA, but we cannot issue tickets, as DPAs are different than an enforceable bylaw where you can issue tickets. So some delays with compliance, some applicants have kind of taken quite a long time to actually implement the mitigation measures. And we can, again, withhold occupancy for that. Sometimes there's some pressure to issue that occupancy, so some attention there. And then applicants, yeah, can take time to complete mitigation measures. On the climate ready rezoning policy, thinking forward, just continuing to align with emerging best practices. So as the building code adopts new requirements to address things like overheating or eventually embodied carbon accounting, which we're hearing a little bit from federal code developments. So just to ensure that we stay ahead of those code changes where those policy gaps exist and where it's feasible. Also a note on just the regulatory context within BC. So it's somewhat unclear of how things like the provincial housing legislation will impact our rezoning policy if we're expecting less rezonings in the future. And then finally, some just points on future updates. Potential updates could include things like additional studies to improve our DPA guidelines, so having more specific requirements on how to protect different tree species, different ecosystems, and to ensure also provincial regulations are met. For example, the guidelines state that the stream side protection DPA is 15 meters from the top of bank of streams. The guidelines and the provincial riparian areas protection regulation allow for some flexibility in this setback, as long as the ecological function is protected, and the reduced setback is compliant with those provincial regulations. So staff generally rely on the QP report to confirm compliance with the provincial regulations, but there is some uncertainty on how many of those projects actually meet the specific requirements in those regulations. So maybe there's an opportunity to explore stronger DPA language, just to ensure that compliance, or other ways to other processes to ensure that compliance. And then finally, an effort to explore opportunities to review, or sorry, to streamline the review process. So our organization is taking a look at areas to streamline and the development review process generally. So this could include things like combining some DPAs, like the form and character DPA that kind of focuses on building design with the energy, water, and GHG reduction DPA, because there's a lot of overlap and potential to integrate those kind of energy efficient building design components, which may allow for some less staff review time and paperwork while updating the energy guidelines to align with these emerging best practices and evolving code requirements. And that's it from me. Just a couple final resources. Schedule B of the OCP, official community plans, where you can find more information about the DPAs. And there's also FAQ documents on our webpage. But I can also answer any questions you have. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for such detailed insights into the DPAs at the district. We will take questions from everybody for both District of North Van and West Van. So feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hands to ask questions. Adam, can I also ask you to put those two resources in the chat? I tried opening them up, but they're not, the web page is not loading. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. I do see some questions in the chat, and Heather's already answered those questions for us. So yeah, feel free to refer to the chat. Raf here had a question for the previous presentation on how is wildfire DPA plant guidelines enforced, for how long post-development approval takes place. And Heather's already answered the question in the chat. I could read it out, or people could refer to it in the chat.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Everyone can read the answer in the chat. Maybe we'll go to Ian's question that hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah. So Ian says, Adam, great, thank you. You included urban heat islands, and he has two questions. Did you do any analysis, modeling, and determine that urban heat island was a significant issue, and what led you to include it in form and character?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I wasn't involved in the analysis modeling. It was back in, I guess, 2011, before it was adopted in 2012 for the DPAs. So I'm not sure about that. I can ask around and try to get back to you. I think it was mostly just kind of encouraging design that addresses thermal safety and thermal comfort. So yeah, avoiding those kind of overheating of indoor spaces, but also, yeah, allowing for passive heating and cooling. What led you to include it in the form and character? Yeah, so I guess we have our form and character DPA separate from our energy conservation, water conservation, and greenhouse gas emissions DPA. We are looking to kind of explore area opportunities to integrate those. I know there's been a couple of municipalities that have started to do that to streamline the regulations. I think why it was included in the energy DPA was it was pretty broad DPA, so just relate. I'm not really. Yeah, I should find out. It seems a little bit proactive back then in 2012, but I think just having a broad DPA to address energy conservation and ensure kind of thermal comfort and safety was likely the driver.
Thanks, Adam. Any more questions in the chat or any more questions?
Quick question here. Any pushback from your development community on all these DPAs and these requirements and policy for additional information?
Yeah, significant pushback. The burden of the additional costs, the burden of, having to design homes to a different way, the difficulty in building to those compliance, lots of pushback from the building community. There's some progressive members of the building community that embrace this, but I would say in general, I have never received positive comments on any of these types of policies, to be perfectly honest. So I would say the reason why the expansion of our wildfire DPA got turned down was we notified the building community. So we have a huge distribution list of all builders, developers, contractors, architects, designers, and we notify them of any upcoming changes that might impact them. And we did that before the public hearing, and their negative feedback likely was what pushed council to turn it down. So yeah, it's a difficult one to navigate, and yeah, so yes, is all I can say. And I'm not really sure, like yeah, it's a difficult one to navigate. You just got to keep pushing. Small incremental changes work, but it's a difficult. They have a loud voice, and they have a voice. And I'm not speaking for DNV, but in West Van, the building community has a lot of persuasion over our council, I would say. So, but then again, like all of our new subdivisions and communities, developments going up in the upper forested area, automatically have all of this put on them, so they know in advance they have to design to it because it's future neighborhoods. So we don't get a lot of pushback from up there, but down in the community more so, I would say.
Thanks, Heather. Go ahead, Marina.
I just wanted to ask the West Van staff about the 15 meters from natural boundary. Did that line, like you did the flood hazard mapping? I'm wondering how did that line get adjusted as a result of the mapping?
No,
Like,
not really.
And
Sorry, go
then
ahead.
I'm assuming that the natural boundary, that is sort of a moving target or whatever, because of the definition always has to be whatever it is, right? So it would move over time.
Yeah, definitely. So, the flood construction, we did the flood mapping to look at the flood construction level, so the elevation at which people would need to build. We did we did it only for like a large area by area. So I think there were 17 different segments. And so for some areas, it's conservative, like because we couldn't look at each site specific condition. So the way it works is that people are welcome to do their own site specific FCL using a coastal engineer, or they can just use ours. We did it so that like we generally knew the DPA and that we provided some resource to a homeowner. The 15 meters from the high tide mark is more like, so I don't know if you've been on the waterfront in West Vancouver, but many of the existing homes have just a armored, like a hard retaining wall in front of their house, and all the beaches have been scoured and eroded. The 15 meters was taken because we also have a watercourse protection area DPA that very consistent with DNV for riparian area protection. For simplicity, we just sort of applied the 15-meter Taba bank to this one. So it's purely to protect the natural environment. So what we see right now is that people will build these high retaining walls on the beachfront, install their pool, and everything is hard surfaces, right? And so this was an attempt to have that more naturalized, push everything back. So yes, the natural boundary does change. We've seen lots of surveys over time through accretion or whatever that it changes, so that that gets reflected. But the 15 meters was just for simplicity, really.
Thanks, Heather. Adam, do you want to weigh in into any of the questions? Rav's question about pushback or anything?
I think I defer to Heather. She's probably a little closer than I am with implementing these DPAs. I was just looking into the other question. What was it on there?
In the chat.
Yeah, just on bylaws. So I think that's one of the tensions with the DPAs is that I'm curious to see how it's going in West Van, but so we can add these conditions onto the development permit, and we can withhold occupancy, and we can withhold the security deposit, but we can't actually issue tickets because we don't have specific bylaws that relate to the DPAs. Yeah, so I think that's some of the things that our team struggle with a little bit, and it might be an area for future development if there's an opportunity to do that. Heather, do you have any other insights there?
Yeah, no, agreed. I think I mentioned above, it is an issue. We do the same things. We withhold, you can't close a building permit and issue occupancy until the DP has been completed. So that does help to ensure compliance because people want to move into their homes. It is registered to title, the DP, so technically the monitoring and long-term maintenance of your landscaping, you're supposed to comply with it. But again, like under OCP, there's no ticketing option. We are updating our community wildfire protection plan, which has a recommendation, and I think other municipalities might be going this way, is having a landscaping bylaw to allow enforcement mechanism of fire smart landscaping. It could be something we look into, but to be honest, it all comes down to a resourcing component as well, lack of staff to really move this forward. So definitely a gap, I would say.
Hey,
Thanks, Bill.
I've got a quick one. I think this was sort of addressed already, but I just want to confirm. For example, with the Foreshore DPA in West Van, that ostensibly includes, a huge number of existing properties already. It sounds like obviously there's no direct implications for those existing properties, but are you aware, have there been any like other ramifications that have come about, like since the implementation of the DPA, for example, like now that that's in place, has there been anything like insurance, for example, that's been affected perhaps, or just because it's now there that does affect the existing properties, or has it largely been a non-issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. That came up a lot in our public engagements, that we would be impacting insurance rates because of this. It's also come up with the wildfire DPA as well. So no, I have not heard that it actually directly impacts your insurance to have a DPA designated over your property to date. So no, it answers your question. That hasn't been an ongoing conversation. It came up. Staff didn't really enter into the insurance discussions during the engagement. We can't comment on that. We don't know, but we haven't heard any concerns about that since then. So that's good. To be honest, there is a lot of properties in the DPA for the waterfront, but not a lot of them redeveloped. And so that's through a DPA, you have a mechanism to influence new builds. As you said, Dave, like we don't have a lot of authority under the Local Government Act to require, some of these things at a renovation or existing builds. So it's a very slow process to build resiliency. Some of the pushback we got was, you have this home that's going to build to a higher elevation, and then this home that's still existing is going to be much lower. And how is that going to impact? That was in 2018 when these guidelines first came out and we started enacting this under the community charter, that it was quite something to have to deal with that. And so we really looked at our stormwater management guidelines and how people develop their stormwater management, and to keep everything so that they wouldn't increase the risk of runoff to their neighbors and stuff.
Right.
Through zoning variances, we allow that and sort of stuff. So it's been an ongoing process to address those issues. But You know, that was a couple of years ago. Things seem to be really settled out now, and people, including designers, architects, and coastal engineers, are really kind of understanding the regulations now, and it seems to be a little bit better.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, I was kind of hoping to see that maybe over time this is being more generally accepted and people are realizing that it's not the end of the world sort of thing. So, yeah.
Now they are. Now when they have massive logs come up in the winter and smash through their houses, they're
Yeah.
okay to say, okay, yeah, we'll build it a few meters higher. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much. This is great information.
Thanks, Heather. We do have a question in chat from Marina. Is anyone aware of an analysis that has ever been taken to assess how well environmental hazard DPAs have accomplished the objectives or guidelines?
Not that I know of. You know, houses are slow to build in West Vancouver, so we only have about a dozen maybe that have built to the wildfire hazard standard, like in the DPA, and maybe only a handful for the Foreshore. So not a huge data set. Adam may have more perspective because their DPAs have been in effect much longer, but yeah, I don't know, Adam, if you have any comment.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't believe that there's any kind of comprehensive study or analysis that's taken place to kind of review the impact of our DPAs. I think it'd be really interesting to see. I think we just rely on those QP reports and those mitigation measures and habitat compensation measures are implemented, and those QPs are signing off to confirm that they have been. Yeah.
I think our watercourse DPAs, Adam, like the ones for riparian protection, that would be the best. I think that's the largest data set we have because it's been in effect for so long. And in West Van, there's so many creeks that run through private properties right now. Just you'd be surprised at how many there are. And over time, there's so much more. And some of them were built like over top of creeks, right beside creeks, like they're the top of bank. And so pulling those back and giving a lot more riparian permeable area, I would say you'd see a difference for sure over time for those. It's definitely an improvement.
Thanks both. Yeah, I think now we will move to our community partners meeting. But before that, we just share our upcoming knowledge sessions that are coming up. And again, I would like to thank all four of you, Adam, Heather, Carolyn, and Chris, for being here and having these important discussions. I will stop the recording in a few minutes, and I'll let Ina share again, her screen again.
Thanks, Nikita. We can stop recording here and I'll